Let us move to Benazir Jatoi. Really speaking, thank you very much to Prajnya for inviting her, because she is really at the moment in London, but based really in Islamabad. And this is really a regional panel because we know that the question of honor crimes is not just confined to our country or certain states within our country, but is a much larger question in our whole region. And Benazir is here with us. She's basically a lawyer who works on gender and minority issues. And her emphasis has been really on laws. And she's drafted the Sikh Marriage Act, which is a personal law for the Sikh community in Punjab, which was passed in 2018 by the Punjab Assembly. And she's also drafted the National Policy on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, which is still at the draft stage. And while talking to her just a little while ago, she said that she's also trying to draft something on violence against children. She is a regular contributor on these issues in the Pakistani print media and highlighting social topics which include minorities, women, and constitutional and legal issues. And we really look forward to listening to her views on this particular topic. Benazir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, inviting me to this. I'm honored and a bit overwhelmed and a bit nervous to speak to everyone here. And thank you for the introduction, Kiran ji. I think it makes me sound more important than I am. But listening to the other two esteemed panelists so far, I feel the borders that our politicians try to highlight so often are actually blurred by issues because they're so common. Violence against women, honor crimes, legal hurdles, societal hurdles, the fact that there's a whole political economy around violence against women, and then honor crimes. I feel like, am I speaking to Pakistani panelists or a Pakistani audience? Because in a way that the borders don't apply, unfortunately, in that sense. I mean, one thing I think that has been highlighted, a lot of similarities exist. So I'll try to distinguish in Pakistan what is going on, because I think that would be something interesting for everyone here, as it's been interesting for me to listen to the Indian perspective. But one thing I just like to say from the start is you talk about caste. Caste is the excuse used. We may not have that obvious caste system, but we use other words for caste. So caste has become the reason behind many things, but for us, we use religion. We use ghairat, which roughly translates into honor, though ghairat has many more meanings. And so, you know, the socio-economic, religious guise that we give on how we control women through violence, through abuse, through discrimination. You may be using the word caste, and we may not be using that, but the problem stays the same. So it would be, I think something like this would be good to, how do we come out of using terminologies that are similar to all of us, to come together on issues like this. Anyway, I'll start with the laws in Pakistan. So the Pakistani state, the Pakistani government, the Pakistani parliament has now become rich in terms of laws. We have so many, we can't keep track. We have so many laws now in terms of violence against women, which includes anti-rape laws, that we keep amending to perfect them. So our laws are becoming perfect, and our society at the same time is becoming more violent. So that is the paradox, the kind of irony in the whole situation, is that we keep fixing until the picture is perfect. Every time a case of violence, of honor crimes, catches the public imagination, our lawmakers perfect the law. The loopholes that activists have identified in law are closed, are addressed. The 2016 anti-honor crime law was an amendment to the Pakistan Penal Code because there were crimes of honor that had come to be highlighted by a famous filmmaker in Pakistan. Under the previous government, that caught the public imagination, came forward to Pakistani politicians and the government of the day, and new laws were brought to light, amendments to the penal code were brought, which basically allowed more discretion to trial judges in recognizing what kind of crime an honor killing was or is considered. So without becoming too technical, what it does is, it doesn't change much in the Pakistan Penal Code, though they pretend like it has. What it did was, it increased the discretion of the trial judge, which in itself is a good thing, because what you've done is, you've said to the judge that actually look at each case in its individual light, in its individual circumstance, and see, was this an aggravated offense? Was it so brutal? Was it so violent that it can affect society or has the potential of affecting society or that community? So it allowed the judge that discretion. What the law failed to recognize, and laws are limited in certain ways, is that the trial judge does not have the capacity, with all due respect, within the court system, lacks that capacity to recognize and separate honor from murder. Because I think what we've done is, when we use the word honor, we, even as activists, because we have no other language, we use the language of our community, of people we advocate with and sit with. But when we use the word honor before killing or honor before murder, what we've done is we've already given them one justification to get away with it. Honor is a justification. Honor, we all hold on to certain type of an honor. We hold on to a place in a community, in our society, within our tribe, our family. We have a place, and that place physically is ourselves, but intangibly is our dignity and our honor. So when we use the word honor before murder, we've already allowed one justification. And so dishonor is perhaps the language that we should all be working towards, because we need to take away that justification that has become the stranglehold of all of this. And trial judges use that same justification because defense lawyers will use the word ghairat, use honor. I hope ghairat is a word understood also by you.
Yes.
Yeah, so they'll use that. So the word ghairat is used in trial courts. You hear it. It's a word used by a judge or used by the defense lawyer. And we've already allowed a certain justification before we've even got to the law and before we've even got to the evidence. And so, like a crime of passion, ghairat was invoked. His ghairat was invoked, allows that. What the 2016 law in Pakistan attempted to do was say to the trial judge, actually, no, we will take things in our hands. We will use our discretion to say that an honor crime is an aggravated crime. It's an aggravated circumstance. In Pakistan, also, the penal code is intertwined with Islamic law. So though we take on the British Pakistan Penal Code in many ways, what we do is we allow certain Islamic provisions, which are of we call them diyat and qisas laws in Pakistan, which are forgiveness and compromise. And so what happens is that pre the 2016 law, though that in effect is still applicable, if you see it working, it still functions. What happens is, if I walk into a courtroom, I can be forgiven by the victim's family for killing the victim. And that forgiveness lies in Islamic provisions of forgiveness and compromise. I think what it doesn't take, and I don't want to get into Islamic jurisprudence here, nor am I an expert, but I think that the thinking, the very shallow thinking behind it is that forgiveness is a very big part of religion. I think what they forget to take into account is forgiveness before the crime is also very much part of religion. If someone has done something wrong and it's affected your honor, or she's ruining the honor of the community, you can forgive. But that's not how it's translated. How we look at it is that once the murder has taken place, once the crime has taken place, then forgiveness is invoked. And that in a courtroom takes place regularly, takes place with impunity, takes place openly, and takes place without the state being involved and thinking that a crime has been committed against the state. So activists in Pakistan have argued for a long time that honor crimes must be considered crimes against the state. Honor crimes must, if not all crimes against women, honor crimes in particular, the provision of forgiveness and compromise, qisas and diyat, should be removed from honor crimes. That is a long-term advocacy points of activists on this particular issue. Of course, the government, not this one, not the previous one, and I don't think the future one will touch it, because when it comes to religion, the Pakistani state is very nervous. Though it is the identity we hold on to, though it is the religion of the state, though it is the constitutional, kind of my constitutional identity, it is something we also fear, because we have allowed fanatics to hijack religious discourse. And so not only ordinary people, not only ordinary activists, but also the state and government have receded their space to religious fundamentalist views and narratives. And that feeds into, for example, blasphemy laws, but also laws such as qisas and diyat laws in honor crimes. And so what we see in Pakistan today is that though the trial judge has been given discretion, a few cases since the 2016 law has seen that defense lawyers will attempt to take away the fact that the person who's been accused has not done it for honor crimes. To not attract this provision that the judge has discretion, if you bring it under ordinary murder, not honor crimes, if you bring it under ordinary murder, then the qisas and diyat provisions, of course, still apply, but also the discretion of the judge is not there. Because what the 2016 law does is that if the judge feels that it's an aggravated circumstance under which this crime was committed, he does not have to accept the forgiveness of the victim's family for the accused. I hope I'm not confusing people here, because sometimes it can be a bit, the legal processes are a bit confusing. But we put the judge in a straitjacket, a judge that actually, to be honest, at the trial level, we're not talking about High Court, we're not talking about Supreme Court. At the trial level, the judge is also limited in his understanding of the issues, and fears for his own safety in many ways, especially when the powerful parties are involved in a case. And I think this takes me to the next point when we talk about honor crimes in particular. And I'm preaching to a converted crowd, but I think while we talk about violence against women and while we talk about honor crimes in particular, what we need to address is, what is the relationship of women with the state? I know honor crimes are against men as well, but if we're just focusing on women here, what is that relationship with the state? I feel in Pakistan, if there is a relationship with the state that women have, it's indirect. It's an indirect relationship. Women don't have a direct relationship with the state. That relationship, if it exists, it's weak. And that relationship is breaking down. Because number one, the patriarchy gets in the way often. But I think when there's a weak relationship, an indirect relationship already, things like, for example, COVID has highlighted that anyone that's already been discriminated against will be discriminated against further. Anyone that's already is prone to violence will be more prone to violence. So that relationship with the state and women has broken down. Even that indirect relationship where they were talking to men, for example, the khutbah on Friday prayers is given to men. Men bring that khutbah back to women at home. So even if it's a state Maulvi speaking at a mosque, it is not a direct relationship. The relationship is through the men of the house. In very few occasions, the state is speaking to women. So I think that is the first thing to question. What kind of structure do we exist in where 49% of the Pakistani population is not spoken to directly? I think the second point, which I think that maybe my Indian guests, Indian panelists would also perhaps agree on or disagree, it would be interesting to know, is that I think that right now there's two Pakistans. There's such a stark gap between what happens when they pass laws and the few activists that speak and the few English columns that I may write or others like me may write, and what happens on the ground. You know, we advocate day and night in our communities and our society that there's no such greater bond than the family bond. Our Prime Minister goes around talking about how the Western breakdown of the family system is affecting the Pakistani family system, and divorce is being impacted because of Western feminism. But actually, it is this family system that's creating honor crimes, that's reinforcing the glue of caste or religion or honor, ghairat, whatever you want to call it. It's our family and communities that reinforce to us which box we belong in. So again, that relationship with the family and with the community and with the state, where do we belong in it? Because I think, at least for me, maybe, I don't want to be isolated from my community. I also have an identity in that community. I also find my roots there, and those roots give me confidence, and I feel proud of that culture as well. So how do we recreate a narrative in which that glue that puts all the ghairat on me? I represent the ghairat of my community, and every child that's given birth to, that's a girl, will now carry with her honor. How do we change that aspect of that narrative? Where does it start? Does it start with the state engagement? Does it start with the community engagement? But I think in Pakistan, what's happened is that there's two Pakistans. There's the Pakistan of the very elite and the Pakistan of the very poor. And I think things like COVID have made it worse. Human Rights Watch says recently that there are 1,000 honor crimes that have been committed in Pakistan recently. 20% increase in honor crimes just in the province of Punjab during COVID only. That's the past year and a half. And these are only known figures. When we're not registering births and we're not registering marriages, we don't know how many people are also dying because of this. So Vincent mentioned data. That data is, at least it's a requirement of the governments to have data. We haven't got that far in many of our systems here. Punjab is the only province that seems to be making progress towards that and recognizing it through the Punjab Commission on the Status of Women. But so far, it's not a nationwide thing, and it's definitely not a federal thing. And the other thing that I think that I'd like to also say is that the first speaker mentioned sexuality. And I think we don't talk about it enough, but basically it all comes down to that. How you control a woman's sexuality and why we fear sexuality so much. Why does the patriarchy make us fear sexuality? Because it starts from that. It starts from control of sexuality. And it leads to things like honor crimes, violence, discrimination, sexual harassment. But it is that. So it's a box that we belong in, and we need to. But what they say to us is we should exercise our sexuality because we should give birth. We should give birth, and we should give birth to many children. Actually, our sexuality is questioned when we don't give birth. If you don't have a child after 9 months of getting married, then we're questioned. Our sexuality is questioned. Our reproductive duties are questioned, but that sexuality is feared when we exercise it. So if someone else controls it, then it's different. But if we control it, it's not. So I think sexuality in itself needs to be looked at, but from the view of the global South. Because I feel like even now when I do certain literature, even if I self-critique, I am too prone to narratives of the global North, of Western society and Western feminist viewpoints. Even if it's radical feminist or socialist feminism, I don't get that. I don't get my, my fill of what our narrative can be. And I think India in that sense has made a lot more progress. So we turn to India to look at certain narratives, but I think there needs to be more. And I think there needs to be more collective coming of us together. Governments may not give us visas, but at least COVID has allowed us to know that Zoom exists, technology exists, internet exists. Can we create a narrative that crosses that border to say, because culturally, I think a lot of it is similar. How do we create one advocacy narrative around honor crimes or violence against women that crosses borders, that blurs lines? And I think one thing that I'd like to say, which are two current things, actually, two things. One is that in Pakistan, there's now more of a consciousness around women's rights through Aurat March. Aurat March has become a new phenomenon of young women marching in urban centers, mainly on women's rights. And it's got a lot of backlash, but it's also got a lot of dialogue. And after a lot of bad news in Pakistan, this is great news from Pakistan. Light is being shown in Pakistan on issues that are to do with women, but also to do with what our place is there, and how equal or unequal we are. But I think one critique that I think we can learn from India is that it's an elite organization. We're organizing. But we're organizing an elite women force. We're not going grassroots. And I think that has to do with the fact that Pakistan has weak democracies. when it does, and it has to have too many dictatorships. I think that women's rights and violence is to a certain extent linked to democratic forums. And when our space gets receded, we only organize with our own. And grassroots, we don't get to the grassroots. And I think that has to do with weak democracy. And I think Pakistan, the situation in Pakistan will actually get worse and needs to be watched, because the situation in Afghanistan will affect Pakistan in many ways. And I think that will affect will affect violence against women. So on that note, I thank you very much. And I look forward to the discussion that's to follow. Thank you.